Hello and welcome to the pre-show for the Tech Guy off the radio. Uh, I'm your host, of course, Pete the Tech Guy. And in the 4 minutes, we have 3 minutes now before the pre-show. I'm going to ask a question that has absolutely nothing to do with anything. I'm looking for a board for a 1999 Buick LeSabre, my car. It needs a board for the windshield wipers. I can't find it anywhere online. I tried several different pot spots. So if you have a pulse board for a 1999 Buick LeSabre or know someone who might, I would appreciate it if you'd contact me because need one to get my car fixed. They had the motor, they didn't have the pulse board, and the pulse board decides my wipers are kind of like sticking up. They won't not going to go down until I get the proper pulse board. Looked online, I had no luck in the time I had. I've been running errands all day. Haven't had a chance to look or do anything yet. You're not even seeing any links in there because I've spent all morning with my wife, which is good. That's, how you stay married 32 years is you prioritize your wife. We had we had lunch. Lunch went much longer than I thought. The place was packed. And actually, I should mention that they put up these plastic barriers now, which meant they were able to use most booths. But the plastic barriers actually aren't going to stop COVID worth a damn. So it's more hoops that people are jumping through here in Massachusetts in order to just do business. And I think it's just so ridiculous that this is happening. And I might use that for the show. Also was on Fault Lines Radio today. I want to thank them for having me. I was on from 8:30 to 9, and we talked a bit about the topic of today's podcast, and we ended up talking a bit about the Black community and the myth of income inequality as something important. And it was a great discussion. They're probably gonna have me back because I'm pretty sure that people don't talk about this in that method. But I know I was very upbeat until about a half hour ago when it turned out that we couldn't fix my car because the motor that came for the thing didn't have the pulse board. Then it turned out we couldn't fix my wife's car. I had appointments for both cars, one after the other, because the part I got for the door won't open from the inside. It won't unlock from the inside. You have to drop down the window and open it. And the part was actually a different rod, so I have to look up that part again. I looked up the wrong one. So I'm batting 0 on cars, which is one of the reasons why I don't do anything mechanical. But it doesn't matter because it's now 3 o'clock. And officially, the Tech Guy off the radio is on the air. I am your host, Pete the Tech Guy. A half fedora, Doctor Who scarf, but not beard will travel. You'll notice this is the first clean-shaven episode we've had in a very long time. Yes, I have a baby face. If you look at me, the hair's cut, the beard's gone, no mustache. I'm almost unrecognizable. If you're a new viewer, I am probably unrecognizable. Or actually, if you're an old viewer, if you're a new viewer, you've never seen me with the beard. So look at an old podcast and you'll see me with the beard. So I am completely unrecognizable to you old timers here. But I'm delighted to have you for probably about, we'll try and do it under an hour this time. I've been going long the last few episodes. But I want to jump right into it. And again, I do apologize. I have a lot less preparation this week because I've been running errands all day and got back late. So we're going to do the 3 topics I mentioned, plus a little potpourri. But the first topic I want to start with was something I had seen just as I got home last night from work. I get out of work at midnight, got home about 20 past, dropped off the car in anticipation of it getting fixed. That did not happen because they couldn't find the part. But we're going to read you this from the New York Post because it is handy. The suspected gunman who fatally shot a right-wing protester in Portland last weekend was reportedly shot and killed by law enforcement authorities Thursday night as they attempted to arrest him. Michael Forrest Reinoehl, I don't know if I pronounced that right, 48 years old, died in Lacey, Washington, where federal agents were attempting to take him into custody for the shooting. The same night, his interview on the shooting appeared on Vice News, the New York Times reported. And we're going to get into a little bit more about the fact that he's having interviews as a fugitive. Reinoehl, in the interview, insisted he acted in self-defense and had no choice when he shot Aaron J. Donaldson, 39, after an evening of clashing protests in Portland, October 29th. Quote, "Had I not acted, I'm confident, my friend, that I'm sure I would have been killed," Reinoehl told Vice News. "Wasn't going to stand there and let that happen." Details of Reinoehl's death were not immediately clear. Police sources had told the Oregonian that he was subject to investigations for the shooting. Reinoehl told in his interview, lamented that the direction the country was heading, saying his fatal shot felt like the start of a war. "Honestly, I hate to see it, but I see a civil war right around the corner. That shot felt like the beginning of a war." The ex-military man said he headed out to Portland that night to provide security for Black Lives Matter protesters who had rallied against the pro-President Trump caravan that was making its way through the city. He didn't say why he felt his life was in danger and stayed away from discussing specifics of the shooting. Well, obviously, those are details that I probably don't want to get into, other than simply saying I realized what happened when asked about the immediate aftermath of the shooting. I was confident I did not hit anyone innocent and made my exit. Reinoehl was cited at a July 5th protest on allegations of possessing a loaded gun in a public place, resisting arrest, and interfering with police, the Oregonian reported. But allegations were dropped on July 30th with a no complaint and no reason given, according to court records. Reinoehl, who has a son and daughter, also had often posted about Black Lives Matter and related protests, and on the social media accounts described himself as 100% Antifa. I can believe that one. Reinoehl, in his Vice News interview, said he was anti-fascist, but not actually a member of Antifa. If you look at the basic definition of it, it's just anti-fascist, and I'm 100% anti-fascist. I'm not a member of Antifa. I'm not a member of anything. He said he was once proud of the U.S., but that pride has turned into anger and fear. "I used to really love my country and respected the flag and everything it represented. Because of all of this, every time I see a big truck, and especially with the flag on it, I immediately think they're out to get me." Now, there's a lot to unpack there. But what I really want to go with is a point I made weeks ago, a bit ago, and I want to stress this again. We've now had shooting deaths in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and shooting deaths within Portland connected to protests and riots, etc. Now, Michael Reinoehl, who shot the person in Portland, is now dead. Young Mr. Rittenhouse is still alive. And the reason why he is alive is because he used what I call, I've given this a name, the Kyle Rittenhouse method of avoiding getting shot by the police. Now, this is a little bit like the if you're old enough to remember the Chris Rock sketch, and if you haven't seen it, go to YouTube when we're done with the podcast and Google it. Search for Chris Rock, how not to get your ass beaten by police. And it gives you like 7 or 8 different ways to avoid getting beaten by police. And it was a very funny sketch. But the bottom line, the Rittenhouse method of not getting shot by police is very simple. Now, Rittenhouse, as you'll remember, was there to help protect property. He had interfaced with police before. He had actually provided first aid for some of the protesters, but got himself isolated, and they went after him. And if you saw the video, you saw him shooting people in self-defense despite the first-degree murder charge. That the charges against him are ridiculous, and it's going to fall. It's politics. But the bottom line is, when things were all done, what did Rittenhouse do? Rittenhouse went to the nearest police people and tried to turn himself in. And one of the things that I'll give them credit for on Fault Lines, they asked, it seemed a little odd that they didn't take him into custody. They must have had more police than just the people going after the wounded guy. And remember, the police considered their first priority to check out the people who were shot. And that's perfectly acceptable. I mean, you want to check out people who've been shot to see if they're all right or if you can save them and so forth. That's perfectly legitimate. But you would have thought there would have been somebody left over to take care of Mr. Rittenhouse. But the bottom line is he attempted to turn himself in. And when they wouldn't let him turn himself in, he came back the next day and turned himself in. Now, this is a thing that can be applied to almost any situation with police that I'm going to say. Now, I am not a police officer. I have no experience in being a police officer. To my knowledge, no one in my family has been a police officer. That I'm not aware of any relative who's a police officer, which given a Sicilian family is a little bit odd, but also given the Sicilian family, maybe it's not so odd. But think about the famous line from the movie The Untouchable. Sean Connery, he's walking the beat. This is before when he meets Elliot Ness. He says, "You've completed the first job of a police officer, which is to get home alive." It's all about the first job of a police officer is to get home alive. And police officers react to threats to their lives. Because, I mean, if you are going into a situation, where there are people who are armed, where there are people who are violent, where there's a criminal who may attempt to escape, or if you're arresting a person, you don't know what condition they're in, you don't know if they're high on something, you don't know if they're armed, you don't know if the guy you pulled aside for speeding might be a drug. You don't know. Always got to be ready for this, because you never know when a situation is going to be, do I live or do I die? And the first thing that a police officer, at least again, this is common sense to me. First thing a police officer is going to be thinking is this person a danger to me? Is this person a threat? Now, if you go over and surrender yourself to police without any resistance, you know what a police officer is thinking? This guy's not a threat. This guy's not a danger to me. I have no need to shoot this guy. That's common sense. Someone trying to surrender is not a danger to you. And that was what Rittenhouse did. And, the very next day, Witten surrendered to the police, gave himself up, didn't resist. Contrast that with the story I just read from the New York Post concerning our friend from Portland, who, Reinoehl got shot while federal agents were taking him into trying to take him into custody. And notice that it was federal agents, not police in Oregon, because police in Oregon have not shown, I mean, the authorities in Oregon have not shown a real interest in arresting rioters. I mean, that's why we're seeing so many federal charges, because they're not interested in getting these rioters. They're on their side. It's just ridiculous. But that's where we are. They're on the same side, and because they're all the same side, people aren't getting charged. But what do you think would have happened if Reinoehl gave himself up? He would have gone to trial. You're looking for a pen, Val?
Do I need to write him a check?
No, he said he wasn't able to fix the car, so there's no money. My wife's going to get her car, which can't be fixed because I ordered the wrong part. It's been a bad day for me in getting cars fixed and so forth, but I digress. Remember, there's a No Frills podcast, so my wife asked me something. I'm going to talk to her. My son's going to take her to the car. So, anyways, I digress. Giving yourself up to the police. Now, think about this application. In almost every police shooting that we hear about, you see the you're going for a gun, trying to get away, trying to do something that prompts the police to shoot. And the police are going to shoot in a couple of different situations. They're going to shoot, are you a danger to me? Are you putting my life in danger? You're going to shoot. Are you about to put someone else in danger? Mr. Blake going into the car with kids in it. Suddenly you could have a hostage situation. Now you shoot. If you have a person who does not resist arrest, who obeys the commands of the police, they're not going to shoot you. Because if they shoot, and even if they want to shoot you, they're unlikely to do so. Because in this day and age, especially, people are going to examine it. Police understand the kind of scrutiny they're under. Police know. You think a police officer wants to shoot at a black person, regardless of what they're doing? Do you think a police officer wants what's going to happen, the scrutiny, everything that's going after them? No, they don't want that, because they understand the danger to their job, to their future, to their everything. This is understood. So if you give police an opportunity to take you in without them having to shoot you, they will be very, very happy to let you take them in without getting yourself shot. Now there's a second piece to this that we have to mention, and we have to mention this in fairness. There are people who are getting themselves shot. And that's this. If you are a criminal, if you know you have outstanding warrants, if you know if the police search your car, they're going to find stuff that's going to put you away. If you know you are going to be put away, what is your first reaction going to be? Your first reaction may not be, now, again, as I said, the Rittenhouse method is a very rational method to keep from getting shot. But your first reaction might not be that. Your first reaction is, oh my God, I don't want to go to jail. Oh my God, I don't want to get caught. Oh my God, what am I going to do if he finds the cocaine? Oh my God, this. Oh my God, that. So the perp is now worrying about the consequences of being arrested. And so the perp does not react using the rational Rittenhouse method of, I'm going to just surrender. Now, if you're dealing with someone who's not high on drugs or not a perp, they're more likely to use this method. But you see, that's the problem. Police generally this is not 1950 in the Jim Crow South. The left tries to pretend that this is still 1950 and everywhere is the Jim Crow South. And it's not. It's just not. And people who try and pretend this for political reasons are foolish. And what's worse is they're putting lives in danger. Because if you, let's say, now there was a Twitter thread a couple of days back about this man he had married a black woman years ago. They have 2 or 3 children. Her father is a surgeon. And he talked about how the wife started reading radical stuff. And now she's convinced that she's not down for it, but things probably for that because she's not suffered. And she's telling the children that the police want to kill them. What do you think is going to happen with those kids when they encounter police? If you think someone is going to kill you and you're unarmed, what are you going to do? You're going to run. You're going to react. You're going to do something foolish. And you know what's going to end up happening? It's going to turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy, because when you reach for something, you go for something, police officer is going to presume you're going for a gun. You're going for this. You're going for that. The false narrative is what puts innocent black people in danger. The criminal behavior is what puts perps in danger. But the false narrative concerning police puts innocent people in danger. And I want to mention something. Ann Coulter had a beautiful piece. It was, and she's been a little crazy lately, but she had a piece at townhall.com that was just wonderful on this. And let's see if I can find it, because as I said, I'm not as prepared as I normally am today because I was running errands with my wife all day. And as I was saying earlier in today's podcast, running errands, good idea. Spend time with your wife. It's one of my tips of staying married 32 years. And she was talking about the advice, the talk that black parents say they have to give their kids about obeying the police, not doing anything, not making sudden moves, not confronting them, and so forth. And what I thought was interesting about it is the assumption that was being made. And the assumption being made by Ann Coulter, by these parents, are that white kids can do these things to police and not have to worry about it. I want to read you this piece. This is called Where's the Talk When We Need It? For many years now, this is Ann Coulter. For many years now, we've gotten mountains of press about the talk, the rite of passage lecture that black parents feel obliged to give their sons so they don't end up getting shot by police. Apparently, unlike white people who are always fighting with cops and resisting arrest, young black men must be purer than Caesar's wife. The main points of the talk, according to Wikipedia, are as follows: pulling your vehicle over right away, keeping your hands visible on the steering wheel and not making sudden moves, not reaching for items in your wallet or glove compartment without informing law enforcement first, being as polite as possible using "yes, sir, officer," not arguing even if you are right. Having seen the video footage of George Floyd fighting with cops, Rayshard Brooks fighting with cops, and Jacob Blake fighting with cops, it looks like at least some black men in America could use a refresher course on the talk. What we need is a Black Lives Matter administrated version of the talk, requiring a notarized certification of completion, acknowledging that the participants took the course, understood it, and pledged to act in accordance with it. True, it's unfair that white people are allowed to free rein to curse cops, lunge at them with knives, and reach into cars as the police are yelling at them not to move. White people get to play fun surprise games with the police. I could be reaching for a Glock, or could be a strawberry push pop. You'll have to wait and see, officer. A Slate article about the talk complained that white people protesting Michigan's lockdown could arrive armed and screaming in government buildings and be afforded unending patience by law enforcement. Of course, it's generally not against the law in an open carry state to either be armed or scream. Some Black Lives Matter protests have been even known to scream. This is despite the media's firm conviction that any armed white man is ipso facto a marauding racist. Reporting on an anti-Obama rally in Phoenix, Arizona in 2009, MSNBC zoomed in on guns slung on a man's body as Contessa Brewer ominously warned. A man at a pro-healthcare reform rally wore a semi-automatic rifle on his shoulder and a pistol on his hip. There are questions about whether this has racial overtones. White people showing up with guns. There's a reason why MSNBC never showed the man's face. He was African American, and yet he wasn't arrested or harassed, other than by MSNBC. The only places where white privilege is truly on display are lily white left-wing redoubts like Seattle, Kenosha, Wisconsin, and Portland, Oregon. The latter was recently described by the New York Times as, quote, one of the whitest big cities in America. In these pale cities, white anarchists are permitted to commit arson, vandalism, assault, and even murder with abandon. Why no Antifa activity in the mostly black cities like Baltimore, Ferguson, Missouri, or Chicago? Evidently, these badass Antifa are too afraid to riot in any majority black cities. They claim to be destroying public and private property on behalf of their black brethren, but are terrified of being around actual black people. White Antifa have been rioting in Portland, super white, for more than 3 months now. On the rare occasion they get arrested, they're immediately released, often bailed out with funds provided by white celebrities like Seth Rogen, Abby Jacobson, Steve Carell. Now that's white privilege. She also left out Kamala Harris, by the way, on that list. It's been such a wonderful, cost-free way to serve black people. Leftists won't work to end the mass immigration that drives down black wages or to abandon trade deals that send jobs out of the country, but they'll fly the BLM flag and fight with police in overwhelmingly white cities. Antifa is following the lead of their corporate allies. Every part of a Nike sneaker is made in a third world country. It's as if the top minds in the nation got together to solve the problem. Quote, how can we ensure that no American jobs are created to manufacture this shoe? Corporate titans would love to do something to help African Americans, like employ them maybe. But remember, wait, I have mutual funds. So instead they smugly proclaim Black Lives Matter, run a commercial with Colin Kaepernick, and they're done. Antifa cretins are spoiling for a fight with police, but not near any large groups of black people. They could get hurt. They've been all-out war on Kyle Rittenhouse, the 17-year-old who shot 3 Antifa in Kenosha in what seems to be clearly self-defense based on the New York Times reconstruction of events. Rittenhouse was in Kenosha to protect people and property from violence. He first rendered aid to these protesters, later ended up being chased by Antifa goons, heard a gunshot behind him, nearly had his head beat in with a skateboard, and was threatened by a gun. People he killed were a convicted child molester and convicted domestic repeat offender, both of you had served time in prison. Takes a lot to get prison time in America, especially if you're white, right? Black Lives Matter. The guy Rittenhouse shot in the arm had a firearms conviction and was coming at him with a gun. But this was an all-white affair. So liberals had to look at other facts to assign blame heroic status, not irrelevant factors like self-defense, reasonable fear, or possibility of escape, but relevant factors. Who was Antifa and who was a Trump supporter? Rittenhouse guilty. With the verdict in, liberals have lost their minds about Rittenhouse. They tell outrageous lies about him, lionize the ex-cons he shot, and aggressively censor anyone who takes a side. Representative Anyaya Presley and Senator Chris Murphy called Rittenhouse a, quote, white supremacist and a right nationalist, respectively, in non-congressionally immunized tweets for any lawyers who might be interested. Meanwhile, for suggesting that Rittenhouse may be innocent, both his attorney and I have been suspended from Twitter. Oh, and by the way, over the weekend, an hour away in Chicago, 54 people were shot and 10 are dead. Woke media. Everyone involved was black? No big deal. And that really illustrates the point. Does anyone actually believe that other than in Portland, where the DA is protecting the Antifa thugs, that people can treat police with impunity and get away with it? I mean, an Ohio sheriff today put out a statement. Actually, this might have been yesterday. I'm sorry. You shoot at police, expect us to shoot back. Now, this is such basic common sense that the idea that someone would have to actually say this out loud is ridiculous. But there you have it. Police. I mean, if you are going to get shot at, if you are going to shoot at police, be prepared for the police to shoot back at you. This is so basic that people should be ashamed for not realizing it. But again, if you don't want to, if nothing else is taken away from this, if you are considering being in a situation where you are breaking the law, or if you have broken the law in the past and may find yourself dealing with police, let me say one more time that the Rittenhouse method of not getting shot by police is, I mean, we can't say that everything is unfailing because there's always the no-knock raid, which is dangerous. And I'm not a big fan of no-knock raids myself. But the Rittenhouse method of not getting shot by police is the way to go. Train yourself in that. If you do, and you encounter police, odds are you're going to still be alive when that encounter is done. Now let's jump over to topic number 2. And one more thing I want to mention about the comparison between Rittenhouse and Reinoehl over here. For Rittenhouse, And I don't believe Rinaldi insisting, oh, I was in fear of my life. The other guy wasn't armed. And the film suggests otherwise very strongly. For Antifa types, in both cases, think about this. If the person with the gun in Kenosha was trying to get away from people, was trying to get away from the violence, the Antifa people were trying to go forward towards it. In Portland, same thing. To the Antifa person, the violence was a feature, not a bug. For the non-Antifa person, the violence was a bug, not a feature. Even the violence that saved his life in Kenosha. Think about that. Speaking of Kenosha, we had an interesting week in Kenosha where we had President Trump announce that he was going to Kenosha. And immediately we had two themes coming out. We had Democrats saying, officials in the state, you should not come here. It's going to cause trouble. You're going to cause unrest. You're going to cause trouble. Donald Trump being in Kenosha is bad for Kenosha. You shouldn't come. You had Joe Biden in the Biden campaign. Oh, we're not going to go into Kenosha. We don't want to interfere. We don't want to cause trouble. You had the media saying, oh, Trump going to Kenosha. Gonna backfire. And Trump said, I'm going to Kenosha anyways. So the president goes to Kenosha. He's well received. People show up for him. He tours the damage. Because of that, people actually saw the extent of the damage that took place. Met with people. It was something shown live. People could see it. Within 24 hours, Joe Biden, he's going to Kenosha. And they at first said he wasn't going to be taking questions, but then he ended up taking questions once he got there. But then the cat came out of the bag that the questions had been given to the people asking questions. They were being told what to ask. And there weren't a whole lot of people who turned up for Joe Biden either. And you look at this going on, you look at the contrast. The contrast here is incredible. I mean, he's not Joe Biden anymore. He's become Joke Biden. I mean, you're reaching, the overreach has been astounding by Biden and the left. Because, look at the reversal. I'm not going to Kenosha. I'm not going to Kenosha. Kenosha bad. Kenosha bad. Don't go to Kenosha. Oh, now we're going to Kenosha. People notice this reversal. And think of what the difference is from 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, we were told that Joe Biden had a lead in all these polls. That Joe Biden had given the greatest speech that any of these newspaper people had seen. And we heard that over and over again. And there are people on the right who said he gave a pretty decent vanilla speech. He didn't foam at the mouth and fall over backwards, which was apparently the standard. The Joe Biden standard for excellence is now not foaming at the mouth and falling over backwards. And that's from a Monty Python skit. I go on and on, never letting anyone get a word in edgewise till I foam at the mouth and fall over backwards. You can look up Google foaming at the mouth and falling over backwards if you want to see the sketch. But that's become the Biden standard. A success for Joe Biden is to be able to answer questions that he already knows are coming with answers he's already prepared and not foaming at the mouth and falling over backwards. That is a Joe Biden success. That's why he's Joke Biden. Now, do we really think that 2 weeks, it's only taken 2 weeks for everything to reverse? The folks at Rasmussen Reports, for example, noticed that suddenly there weren't polls after the thing. After previous conventions, there were a bunch of polls that had been run. And suddenly there weren't polls being run. Why weren't those polls being run? Because even the skewed polls were looking good for Trump. And if the skewed polls were looking good for Trump, how must the internal polls, the polls that they're actually seeing, that they're paying for to know what's actually happening, how bad must those be? And seriously, we need to set up an over and under as to whether or not Joe Biden will still be in the race by the time the second debate comes. I mean, is he going to be replaced before the first debate? Is he going to be knocked out by the second debate? Is he going to be replaced by the third debate? I mean, how many of you guys watching, either live or picking it up later, think that Joe Biden will still be the head of the Democrat ticket by the time Election Day comes? I'm becoming more and more doubtful for it, because I theorized before that the Democrats understood they were losing and ran Biden because they didn't want to, taint anyone else with a loss. But now it's getting more serious. Now, this has the potential to affect down race. And if it affects down race, it's very, very critical. And if they could have, if they thought that it would just be Donald Trump winning and it has no effect on down race things, I don't think they'd be as worried or as panicked now. I think they'd take it. If they thought it was going to be like Chris Christie in New Jersey, I don't think they would worry. And I've talked about this in the blog in the past, that Chris Christie, when they were talking about him running for president, I noted how he had no coattails. He would win election, but Republicans would not be winning down below him. He had no interest in that. And that's dangerous. If you want to win, you got to help out below ticket. And President Trump always pushes the GOP below ticket, which the Democrats have to be worried about. How many, I mean, remember at every Trump rally, you see him now introducing officials and giving them high fives, giving them a heads up, thumbs up, even when they don't show up, even when Governor Sununu took off on him, gave him a thumbs up, gave him, talked him up a bit. You don't see that at a Biden rally, because Biden doesn't have it in him anymore. I mean, if this was the Biden of 10 years ago, you might have seen that, because he was a retail type politician. You don't see that anymore, because he ain't got it. And I'm firmly of the opinion that if the Democrats think Biden is going to cost them enough seats in the House and in the Senate and in state house races, that you're going to see him suddenly become too sick to run and suddenly be gone. Or they might arrange something worse. I mean, let's face it, people who will back riots and will pay for rioters and people burning down cities to be bailed out, and to pay for people to assault cops and get bailed out and try and burn down police things, union places with people inside them. You think they'd have a problem knocking off Biden and trying to blame Trump? I don't think so. That is how low my opinion of the Democrats have gotten. And there's a reason for this. If it was just a question of we're going to lose our insider status for another 4 years because Trump isn't hiring us, so we're cut off from the money for another 4 years, I think they'd put up with it. But if they're talking about a fundamental realignment where they're locked out, that's another story. Or, as Glenn Reynolds suggested a year or two ago, he suggested that the whole Russia collusion business came about because the Democrats that the spying on the Trump campaign was worse than it seemed, and they need to cover it up to keep themselves from getting caught. And that's becoming more plausible to me. And I'm wondering if people are basically trying to protect themselves. I don't know for sure. But I do know that I've been saying for a long time that Donald Trump's going to win this election, that these polls are just bullshit, and that Trump is ahead and has been ahead. I don't think Trump has gained all that much ground. I think Trump already had the ground. I think that you're seeing more people confident enough to come out. And I think you're also seeing some Biden people are saying, I can't vote for this guy. I can't vote for this guy. Now, the Bernie people already didn't like him. But they're people, he's a dementia patient. I'm sorry. It's almost elder abuse what they're doing with him. He's a joke. That's why I've been calling him Joke Biden. And the double standards we've seen here from Biden. You can't go here, you can't go there. He was too, it was too dangerous for him to go to accept the nomination in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but it was safe enough for him to go to Kenosha once Trump had gone first. It's an amazing, amazing thing. It really is. But not as amazing as Nancy Pelosi's move. Now, in one respect, the Nancy Pelosi move is not amazing. She's part of the privilege set. She's been part of the privilege set for many decades. And she's the most powerful Democrat in the country at the moment. So naturally, she thought she could do what other people couldn't, and it didn't matter. But this is the type of thing that people notice. When you are doing something, I mean, remember I mentioned about the class warfare, how income inequality is not that big a deal in reality. And I talked about this on my appearance on Fault Line News Radio. I've got the, if you go to my website, DaTechGuyblog.com, you'll be able to hear that interview. What Pelosi did is sort of like the bank scandal just before the GOP took the House for the first time in 40 years in 1994. And for those of you who are too young to remember this, basically, members of Congress had privileges where they could write checks above their balances, and the House would cover the checks, even if they didn't have the money in it. They were basically kiking checks, and the federal government was covering it. And that went over like a lead balloon, because for the average person, now I've never bounced a check, thank God. I've always been careful about writing. I never write a check. I don't use ATM cards. I don't like ATMs. I don't like debit cards. I like checks if I'm going to use a check. And maybe because I'm old, perhaps. But people understood that this was a privilege that they had denied. And it upset them. How dare these guys, who does this guy who works for me get off writing a check when they don't have the money and expecting me, the federal government, to be able to cover it for them? Well, here's Nancy Pelosi, who's been big on masks, big on social distancing, big on all of these things, going to a salon. Now, you'll notice if you were here last week, of course, I have a haircut. And I have my beard shaved off. I shaved off the beard. My wife cut my hair. I didn't go to a barber. A lot of people haven't gone to barbers. A lot of women have not got to go to the salon, depending on the state you're in. And by a strange coincidence, after this happened, LA decided to allow salons and such to open at 25% capacity, even though this was San Francisco, so it doesn't cover there. But the bottom line is that the average person can understand it. And because the average person can understand it, they're upset. And even liberals in San Francisco, I suspect, are upset. And I think Pelosi will lose her seat over it? Probably not. It'd be nice, though. Because, in fact, for the ultra-liberals who tried to primary her and fail, it would probably be smart, if they really want to get rid of her, it'd probably be smart for them to vote for the Republican. Get Pelosi out, then have your progressive run against a one-term Republican in a district that's 90% Democrat. I mean, you're going to get the seat back. But you get someone, you get rid of Pelosi, and if the GOP takes Congress, which I think they're going to, you get a vote in the majority again. A vote that you haven't had for 8 years, a vote with the majority with a friendly president inside. It's worth a shot. But this is why what Pelosi did was so ridiculous, because people can understand it. The average person who was not allowed to get a haircut, who was not allowed to go on vacation, who was not allowed to go to various things, all understand this. I mean, at my work, to give you an example, where I work, they just installed new COVID protocols. We're asked on a daily basis about if we've been in contact with people. And we've been told that, hey, if you show symptoms of someone, you have to get a test, call out. Now, my wife is a registered nurse. So if she gets random testing. So if she gets a test, she's working tomorrow, for example. If they decide, okay, time for a random test, she gets tested on Saturday. I can't go into work until the results come in. So if she gets tested tomorrow, I'm going to lose my holiday pay for Labor Day because I won't be allowed to go in on Sunday. And of course, if I don't tell them and go in anyways and they find out, grounds for dismissal. But Nancy Pelosi ignored all this stuff. Now, a lot of it is BS. For example, today I went to lunch with my wife at the 99 restaurants. I went there because my normal restaurant doesn't open for lunch anymore because of the COVID stuff, which I'm missing very much. 99s are very good. I mean, it took a little while today because they were packed. And one of the reasons why they were packed is they had just put up plastic dividers between booths. So instead of having to do every other booth, now they could use every booth. Because under the rules here in Massachusetts, plastic dividers, you have dividers between the thing, you can do full seating. Now, again, my wife is a nurse. She's over there. These plastic dividers aren't going to help anyone. They're not going to stop the spread of COVID. It's more hoops that the businesses have to jump through. And the more hoops you make the average person jump through when you are not jumping through them, the more backlash you're going to get. And this is, you see, the Democrats, in my opinion, are basically, they want to be feudal lords. They want to be the lords of the manor, and you are the serfs. You are the servants. You are allowed what privileges they decide to allow you. And they're above you, and you have to accept it. That's what's really become of this. This has become the Democrats and the left have basically created a system of nobility, a system of aristocracy in the United States with themselves on top. That's what's going on. But the Pelosi story isn't going away, which is why you see the fake Trump story that they're trying to play now with the vets. It would be almost amusing if it wasn't so pathetic. And the media going along with it is pathetic. And let me tell you something about the media. There are people who are still saying how shocked they are that the Democrats are being so, that the media is being so uninquisitive. I mean, you actually had a writer from the Atlantic ask Joe Biden about Trump's soul. Doesn't like the accusation, and he does not liking the feedback, according to Twitchy, that this has created. Now, what's fun about all of this is that people are getting upset about it, but they shouldn't be getting upset about it because you are thinking of journalists as if they're journalists, and they haven't been for a while. Journalism, CBS, ABC, NBC, PBS, CNN, MSNBC, they're not news outlets. They're churches. They are places of worship. And the people on them, from Joy Reid to Wolf Blitzer to Don Lemon to the Cuomos, they are televangelists. Think of them like that, and this will all make sense. They are televangelists for the left. It's all they are. All they are televangelists. I mean, look at what happened with National Public Radio. They promoted the views of a pro-looting activist who's a big anti-Semite. And here's a piece from the Washington Examiner. In late August, NPR's Code Switch department published an interview with Vicky Osterweil, author of In Defense of Looting. In the interview, Osterweil was given free rein to spot several major falsehoods, drawing little or no pushback from NPR. Quote, the Q&A with this provocative author did not serve NPR's audience, the news group's public editor said. On top of being wrong about recent events, the author's characterization of the civil rights movement is a distortion and oversimplification. Why are they starting to say this? Because they're getting pushback. Why are these people acting like this? Because they're getting pushback. These people are televangelists. The media is a church, and their anchors are televangelists. They're televangelists for the left and for Marxism. the televangelists for the Democrats. And one of the reasons why the televangelists and the Democrats is how many aides on TV, I think of Chris Matthews, who's now gone, aide to a Democrat who was in Congress. Chuck Todd, aide to a Democrat. How many people literally leave the employ of a Democrat member of Congress and end up in a newsroom with a job or as a commentary? Or look at George Stephanopoulos, for God's sakes. He was Clinton's hatchet man. And now he's passed off as an impartial host. Don't think of them like that. All they are televangelists. They're televangelists for Marxism. They're televangelists for Joke Biden. And there are people foolish enough to give and to play along. But I think the worm is turning. And that's why you're seeing the talk about don't be upset if there's a Trump landslide because we're going to get it back. Now, Jacobson, Professor William Jacobson at Legal Insurrection has a piece up today saying Democrats are telling you they will not accept a Donald Trump win. Are you listening? I want to read you this in closing here. Democrats are telling us they will not accept a Donald Trump win. Are you listening? Hillary Clinton said under no circumstances should Biden concede election night. Democrats should plan for weeks and months of litigation and ballot fights. The tweet from the recount says Hillary Clinton has advice for Joe Biden: don't concede a close race. The 2016 nominee sits down with Jim Palmieri and show the circus to urge Democrats to pay close attention to the GOP strategy. The quote Reg Mirage theory, recently floated by Democrat data firm and promoted by Axios, predicts that Trump will have a largely on election night that will evaporate in the ensuing weeks as mail-in battle is accounted. It provides a ground upon which Democrats will refuse to concede the election either election night or in the following day. Rather, the claimed certainty is that there is a wave of Biden mail-in votes yet to be counted, and all Democrats will need is to make a concerted post-election day effort to steal the election. I wrote about this the other day in the Red Mirage theory proves the justification for Democrat mischief post-election day. Quote, excuse me, what is the significance of all this? Democrats are going to try and steal the election after Election Day. The way they tried to steal Florida 2000 through selective recounting until the Supreme Court stopped them. If Trump is far ahead on Election Day, there will be pitched battles in swing states to count ballots in the Democrat areas that arrive late or don't comply with the rules, and disqualified valid ballots in Republican areas. The Red Mirage theory is the excuse to try. Having spent 4 years perfecting resistance litigation against Trump, there's little doubt that the Democrats will try and find a judge somewhere, somehow, who will issue an injunction or other to a relief to enable this theft to take place. Such relief may not ultimately prevail, but it will further the chaos. Unquote. There's also something called the Transition Integrity Project, a supposedly bipartisan, but the Republican side is represented by Michael Steele and Bill Kristol, devoted Never Trumpers. So the TIP is a Democrat Never Trump version of what might happen. TIP released a report, and almost every scenario they outline involves a Democrat refusing to accept an election-like result, indeed the election result at all. They blame Trump for Democrats' refusal to accept the election in a perverse justification for planning to refuse to accept the Trump win. Specific recommendations include, quote, plan for a contested election. If there's a crisis, events will unfold quickly, and sleep-deprived leaders will be asked to make consequential decisions quickly. Thinking through options now will help you ensure better decisions. Approach this as a political battle, not just a legal battle. In the event of electoral consultation, sustained political mobilization will likely be crucial to ensuring transition integrity. Dedicated staff and resources need to be in place at least through the end of January. Focus on the readiness in the states. Provide political support for a complete and accurate count. Governors, Secretary of States, Attorney Generals, and legislatures can communicate and reinforce laws and norms. Be ready to confront irregularities. Election officials will need political and public support to see the easings through. Address the two biggest threats head on: lies about voter fraud and escalating violence. Voter fraud is virtually non-existent, and we're going to jump out of that voter fraud is virtually non-resistant statement from our friends in the Democrats. And I want to point out something that came out earlier today that I retweeted concerning Project Veritas. Apparently, they had a New Hampshire man arrested after being caught on Project Veritas tape admitting to voting twice in 2016. Vincent Manzello created a fake persona, Helen Ashley. The fake persona was appointed elections inspector by the chair of the Democrat Party in New Hampshire in July of 2020. Now, I want to point out to you something about New Hampshire in 2020. There was a very key Senate race with Kelly Ayotte. Kelly Ayotte lost her election by 0.2% in a state with a low population. Donald Trump lost New Hampshire, and that wasn't called until a couple of days later, by under 0.5%. And a person like this is becoming an elections inspector, and these guys are actually trying to say that there's no such thing as voter fraud. Are you kidding me? This is going to be big voter fraud. Let me go back to the piece. But Trump lies about it to create a narrative designed to politically mobilize his base and create the basis for contesting the results should he lose. The potential for violent conflict is high, particularly since Trump encourages his supporters to take up arms. Anticipate a rocky administrative transition. Transition teams will likely do two things simultaneously: defend against Trump's reckless actions on his way out of office and find creative solutions to ensure landing teams are able to access the information and resources they need to prepare for governing. Now, that's not going to be a problem because Trump's going to kick their ass. One of the authors of the report, Georgetown law professor Rosa Brooks, has an op-ed at the Washington Post today, which most charitably could be called paranoid and delusional, yet is a continuation of the belief that Democrats need to fight the election night result with everything possible. What's the worst that could happen? A landslide for Joe Biden resulted in a relatively orderly transfer of power. Quote, every other scenario we looked at involved street-level violence and political crisis. But Trump refuses to concede, alleging on Twitter that millions of illegal aliens and dead people have voted in large numbers, that the uncounted ballots are all fake votes. Social media fills with posts from Trump supporters alleging that the election has been stolen in a deep state coup, and Trump-friendly pundits on Fox News and OAN echo the charge. Soon, Attorney General William Barr opens an investigation into unsubstantiated allegations of massive voter fraud and ties between Democrat officials and Antifa. In Michigan and Wisconsin, where Biden has won the official vote, and again, this is all speculation, Democrat governors have certified slates of pro-Biden electors. The Trump campaign persuades Republican-controlled legislatures to send rival pro-Trump states to Congress for electoral college vote. The next week is chaotic. A list of Michigan and Wisconsin elections for Biden's circulates on right-wing social media, including photos, home addresses, and false claims that scores of them are in the pay of George Soros or have been linked to child theft tracking rings. Massive pro-Biden street protests began, demanding Trump concede. The protest tweets revealed, real patriots must show these Antifa terrorists that the citizens who love the Second Amendment will never let them steal this election. Around the nation, violent clashes erupt. Several people are injured and killed in multiple incidents, though reports of conflicts about their identities who started the violence. Meanwhile, Trump declares that unless the carnage ends now, he will invoke the Insurrection Act and send in our incredibly powerful military and their ominous weapons into the streets to teach these anti-American terrorists a lesson. The Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs of Staff convene a hurried meeting to discuss the crisis. And this isn't even Thanksgiving yet. Now back to Jacobson. This is psychiatric level projection. This is most similar to what the Democrats did after 2016, trying to intimidate electors and circulating elector names and addresses, rioting during the inauguration, and launching a years-long and ongoing resistance with the help of James Comey and other senior FBI counterintelligence officials. This fits with months-long push to convince people that Trump will refuse to leave office to set the stage for Democrats' refusal to accept the result if it favors Trump. And Jacobson has a long list of such articles here. I'm going to jump to the end. David Hassani at National Review, reviewing the Washington Post column, correctly calls it all a project to delegitimize a Trump win. The scenario is what a real-life coup might resemble. It is, needless to say, utterly insane that Democrats would destroy the nation's long-standing peaceful transition because they refuse to accept the mandated process of electing the president. All of which is to say, the proactive and retroactive delegitimization of the presidency has been a successful 4-year project. It permeates the entire Democrat Party information complex. Democrats and never Trumpers are telling you they will not accept the Trump win. Are you listening? Well, we're listening, but I don't think it's going to matter if he wins big enough. And I don't think there's enough popular support. You got a lot of people on Twitter who are loud. You got a lot of people in media who are loud. But media, it doesn't matter how loud you are if you're talking only to a church. And Twitter isn't real life, no matter what some corporations think. People are going to want to live their lives. And this stuff isn't going to float, and especially not going to float if people don't allow it to float. I think the Democrats basically are trying to whip up fear. Because what they're going to do, if they decide they can't steal the election from Trump, and they probably can't at this point, what they're going to try and do is steal as many congressional seats as they can. That's what the Republicans really have to do. Because between Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi blowing it, so to speak, I think this race is over. And I think they know it's over too. If it isn't over now, after the debates, it will be, assuming they actually take place. Well, it's almost an hour. That's about all the time I've got. I want to thank you for spending this last hour with me on the Tech Guy Off the Radio. Want to remind you, if you like what you heard, like the video, please share the video. If you really like it, consider hitting the tip jar. The goal remains the extra $180 a month that we're looking for. And now I still got to find parts for 2 cars to get them up and running again. But I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience with me. And thank you for this more improvised version, because, again, I was tied up for most of the day. But you take care. We will see you next week with... Oh, actually, I should make a programming note for next week. It just hit me. We have, at my work, we have Labor Day off. But there's an awful lot of work where I am. And it's very likely that they will ask us to work on Friday of next week. And I may or may not decide to do it. It won't be overtime because it wouldn't be because Monday would be vacation time. But I might just do it because that'd be the equivalent of a lot of tip jar hits. However, let me say this. If I do work, I have to be in for 3:30, so I obviously can't go have a 3 o'clock podcast. So I don't know yet if I will move the podcast to Saturday, if I will move it to 10 a.m., or if I'll just give it a miss next week. I will let you know, depending on what happens with work. So I'll try and let you know by Wednesday or Thursday, because I should know by Wednesday or Thursday myself. But until then, again, this is Pete the Tech Guy saying thanks a lot for stopping by, and hope to see you again next week. Have a great Labor Day.